But what you have done with Philips de Pury all these years, I think it's not easy to combat with these two big giants, and you did a great job. And I think you gained this glam rock auctioneer title during this period. Tell us a bit about that area. I mean, I think you catched very well the hype of that, new collectors.
Yes, I think in that respect, if you allude to that, possibly one of my most exciting periods was the years that I spent at Philips, because we were facing the big duopoly of Christie's and Sotheby's, and I did not have the means to compete with them financially. In no respect did I have the means to compete, to take them on. So I decided to focus on areas that they were not focusing on. And therefore, I focused on contemporary art, design, and photography. And just so happens that these three areas became the areas that developed the fastest. And before, artworks that had been created just recently would not show up at auction. But we, with my colleagues at Philips, every season we sat around and decided which are the artists that we really strongly believe in. And so if we believed in an artist, we introduced him for the first time into the auctions. And if we particularly loved an artist, we would fast track him and put him straight away into the evening auction, because the evening auctions are the ones that get all the attention from the media, whereas the day auctions are more auctions that get noticed by the professionals and the collectors. And my greatest pride during those years is that I think we became tastemakers for the art market, because if I look at all the artists that Philips has introduced to the auction marketplace between 2001 and 2008, most of these artists have made brilliant careers and have really gone from strength to strength subsequently. I remember, we were championing the works of Christopher Wool when his works were selling in very low figures, or I remember us beating the world record for Damien Hirst, and everybody thought you are mad and crazy. And this, of course, turned out to be a fraction of the prices his works did later on. Jeff Koons, Urs Fischer, Mark Bradford, Mark Grotian, Ai Weiwei. I could give you a long list. We did the same thing with photography. We were championing people like Helmut Newton or Irving Penn or Richard Avedon. Same thing in design. We were championing people like Ron Arad or like Mark Newson, or even ceramics. We were championing people like Edmond de Waal. And then when Larry Gagosian took over Edmond de Waal, a ceramicist, to be represented by the largest gallery in the world, I thought, wow, this shows that we did something right.
So that means, your eyes, the eyes that you used to pick these future stars. What are you picking right now? Do you continue to do that? And from that on,
yes, what obsesses me the most is precisely this. I love art from all periods, all civilizations, all parts of the world. I'm fascinated by art, regardless of its age or type. However, the only difference between contemporary art and art from the past is that the artists who do contemporary art are amongst us. And so if we love an artwork, not only have we got the chance to experience that artwork, but we have the possibility, if we want to to get to know the artist, to meet the artist. And that is something so extraordinary because, when I go to the National Gallery, I can't have an exchange with Rembrandt or with Rubens or Titian, who will tell me what they thought when they did an artwork. But with all the top contemporary artists, they're some way or level, they are approachable. And that's what is exciting. The other thing that excites me is when you don't have the consensus that has been created. It's very easy 20 years later, when the consensus has been created, to say this is good and this is not good. Exactly. I love being able to take a risk and say this is good when you don't know yet how an artist is really going to develop. Maybe he's good right now, but he may do lousy work for the next 60 years. So you take a gamble. It's much more risky to buy contemporary art than to buy established art.
Exactly. Now, for an artist, for a young artist from unknown territories, what is the best road? I mean, is there any chance for this artist to be discovered?
Yes, I think that it still is very difficult for any aspiring artist to get attention. Let's be realistic about that. It remains very, very tough for a young artist to get into it, to put your foot in the door. However, I think it's much easier today than when it was when I was wanting to become an artist 50 years ago, when I was going to knock on the doors of big galleries and 5 minutes later I would be back in the street. Today, you have different ways of getting attention. I mean, one way has been street art. You mentioned Banksy earlier. There are a number of artists today who became, got worldwide fame through starting a street artist. Let's not forget that Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring started as street artists. Then, but I think the biggest factor is really social media. In the same way that YouTube transformed the music market, the Instagram has transformed the visual art market. I have discovered some artists purely through Instagram, and my first contact of their work was through Instagram. Now, I did a show of a young Chilean artist called Guillermo Lorca, and I saw him on Instagram, and I was wondering, why did I suddenly see his work on Instagram? And in fact, it's because he has a very clever girlfriend who made sure that she was tagging me on some works, and she was tagging other people in the art market, and so there was no way for me not to see it. And I was so intrigued by these works when I was seeing them, because it's so different of anything I had ever seen, that it caught my attention. Then I contacted the artists and so on. And I know several curators who have discovered young artists on Instagram or on other social media. So it just shows that you have more possibilities of getting traction. And even the professional art market may be slow to get onto it, in the same way that the professional music market has been slow to then get onto it and embrace it, but it is a brilliant way to get initial traction.
Thank you. Now, I have maybe one more question related to auctions, and I think I kept you a lot, and you must be very tired. Maybe we may have some questions from the audience, but let me ask you my final question, if you want. What is how you decide the lots in an auction? I think it's very important where you place an item, because as an economist, I did a study, and I discovered and make it mathematically prove that this lot number is extremely important. And if you move it a bit early, a bit later, you may have a different reaction due to the auction fatigue. Time is important.
No, that's a very good question. And when you're an auctioneer, the sequence of your auction is very, very important. So the way you orchestrate the sequence in which orders or artworks are being sold is essential. You can't just do it in alphabetical order or in chronological order. It will not work. So what you want is to constantly have the rhythm that changes during auction. You don't want it to become monotonous. So you must have some high points, some very exciting high energy points, and some moments when it's more quiet. And so you've got to make sure that it's a constant kind of scenography, not scenography, but don't know how you say it. It's like a script of a play. It has to really make sense that you have, that it remains exciting right up to the end. Now, that is a key factor. Then you have also things like numerology. I am the most superstitious person you will ever meet. And so I react to certain numbers and don't react to others. So we know that in Asia, the number 8 is very, very important and is viewed as being a good and a lucky number. So sometimes you place, when you think you will have a strong Asian audience, you put your work in 8 or something which has an 8 in it. That may play a role, but you know, I once had a client who had something that I was dying to get for auction. And for years, I kept telling him, you sure you don't want to sell it? And he said, no, I don't want to sell it. And this person was born on the 13th of the month. And for this person, the 13th was his lucky day. And suddenly I saw, oh my God, the auction is going to be on the 13th. So I called him up and I said, listen, the big auction this year is going to be on the 13th. Why don't you give me your painting and we make it lot number 13? And he was so convinced by that this did the trick, and we sold this work, and it did a record price, and he was thrilled. And of course, he thought the sole reason why it sold so well is because we had chosen 13, which for him was a lucky number. As you know, there are a lot of countries who do not consider 13 to be a lucky number.
I know very well. In Canada, the elevators don't have 13. They skip the 13th
they
floor.
Skip 13, yes.
Yeah. So I have also a similar question related to music manuscripts. I don't know how much you're interested to that, but we had also a study, an econometric study related to classical music manuscripts, and I worked with Sotheby's data set, and Sotheby's classical music auction expert. He helped us to some extent. At the end of this work, we discovered that Sotheby's sold this classical manuscript page by page, and that generated much more higher prices and more revenue at the end. Do you think that making the art, not the artworks in this case, but kind of books and manuscripts, I think it's not a good idea, but do you think that it's a deliberate attempt to?
Well, yes, it's an interesting example that you mentioned, because it does happen with manuscripts, not only in music, but also sometimes there's a body of works that were conceived by the author or by the musician, composer, or by the artist as one integral part of one integral artwork. Now, when it is pages that you can basically separate out, the likelihood that the individual pages will sell for a higher total is actually quite strong. So, but at the same time, you have a cultural responsibility of leaving and respecting the intention of the artist. And therefore, if he created something as an integral artwork, to effectively leave it intact. Now, I remember selling at auction some drawings by some artists, which were from a notebook of an artist. So therefore, you could argue both ways. You could argue, well, the complete notebook is one notebook, but equally, each drawing was like an individual artwork. So what we did then, we sold them first individually, but we said to everybody, your bid is not going to be final, because once we've sold all the works individual, we do the total, And then if there is somebody who is prepared to bid more for the complete set, that person wins. So we sold each thing individually, then we got a very, very high total. And then we said, now who wants to buy the whole thing? And then there were 2 more people who then continued the auction for the complete work. So in the end, you got the best from both worlds. You got the best price by selling it all individually, yet you still offer the chance to have the whole thing together. So because as an auctioneer, your primary responsibility is towards the vendor. You've got to try and obtain the highest possible price at that given moment for the vendor. And that is a way to guarantee the vendor that he will get the best possible price.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, auctions are so high pay events. Every year I take all my students to the auctions, and they have an auction project, and they have they have as an assignment one work, and they follow what are the activities, how this work is sold, what are the price how the prices increased during the auction. But unfortunately, we can't have this during these COVID times. So I thank you very much. I mean, how many times I thank you, it won't be enough. It was wonderful talking to you. Are there any questions from the audience to Mr. De Pury?
Yes, hello. I would like to ask. Sorry.
Okay, please.
You mentioned Andy Warhol was a great at self-publicizing himself. Can you elaborate on that?
Andy Warhol was a very shy person who was socially nearly awkward in terms of not being a great conversationalist, yet he was very, very apt at being part of where the action was socially. So he soon reached a status that only very few megastars reach. So he became rapidly a top A-lister. And so whether it was a big party at Studio 54, or if it was a big, a very private dinner or an opening somewhere, if Andy Warhol was seen there, it made instantly the event much more important and more glamorous. And you could, of course, be certain that he was the one who was being photographed afterwards when photographs were publicized of that particular event. So in that sense, he was you felt that he was omnipresent. And then he was also an artist who excelled in many different disciplines. He was a great artist, painter, but he was a great, prior to that, a great illustrator. He was a movie maker. He was obsessed with music, had a great influence also on pop music. He was linking with key people in society who were playing big roles in their respective fields. And so he became incontournable, you say in French, I mean, unavoidable in a sense. Yeah. And he achieved a celebrity status that was way above that of his peers, of the other top artists who were active at the same time. Now, at the same time, people were very suspicious of that. They said, oh, but he's so social, he's so this, he's so that. But eventually, people began to understand that everything about Andy Warhol, the whole way he conducted his life, his diaries, his Polaroids, everything was part of his kind of a general big artwork that he did, or Andy Warhol as a collector. And I think that in the end, the market recognized that the substance and the artistic substance in his work itself was there and, lasted through times. But there was a moment in the early 90s when prices for Andy Warhol's works were going downwards. And there was a people said, oh, he's produced so much, there's so many works, one doesn't know how many works he has done, and people were writing him off. There were some very negative articles appearing in the press in the early 90s on his work. And then the first catalogue raisonnés appeared. Catalogue raisonnés are the books in which every work that he's ever done are repertoried. And so you knew exactly how many Marilyns he had done, how many flower works, of which colors, what size, etc., etc. And so as soon as the confidence came back in terms of knowing how many works were out there, the confidence began to build again. And then his prices have begun to, increase, and he became, a real blue chip in art market terms. The other thing, of course, that has helped his market is that that's the one thing that Andy Warhol has in common with Picasso, is that year after year, if you make the total of all the works that are being sold at auction, you have the biggest total are obtained by works by Picasso and Warhol. You have sufficient amount of works to feed the market on a permanent basis, but not too many to flood the market. So you just have the right balance for a real market.